네, 여러분 안녕하십니까? 서울 혁신 중
Ladies and gentlemen, at the 2020 Seoul Innovation Week,
특별 세션 진행을
I am Park Sun-young, your MC for the special session this evening following the keynote session this morning.
2020. I am Sunyoung Park and I'll be also with you for the special session following the keynote session. 네, 여러분 유익한 시간 되시고 계십니까?
Are you having a good time with our Seoul Innovation Week?
우리가 저
In the 2020 Seoul Innovation Week, various opinions on urban transformation are exchanged by looking back on the ecological and economic crisis we have faced after the COVID-19 pandemic. With the convening of the event today, we have been having constructive discussions from this morning, and I have been able to see there are so many exchange of comments going on YouTube comment section. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for your participation. The Seoul City has led a number of innovation projects over the past 8 years. Together with SIX, the International Advisory Group, we have identified success stories of social innovation in Seoul, and we would like to share them globally. In this special session today, 7 speakers will present and discuss on the theme of the footprint of Seoul's social innovation legacy on the ecosystem of global social innovation. First, CEO Louise Pulford of SIX will give her opening remarks. I'll see you again in a moment.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you are joining us from Seoul or across Asia. My name is Louise Pulford, and I'm the Executive Director of the Social Innovation Exchange, and I will be your moderator for the next 85 minutes. I'm delighted to be able to host this session as part of the Seoul Innovation Forum and Future Innovation Week. In fact, many of the people you'll see today have participated in several Future Innovation Weeks in Seoul itself, and we're really, really excited to be able to come back next year. But for now, happy to see you all on Zoom. I know there are so many of our global friends here in this global session of the Seoul Innovation Week and Forum. And so welcome, everybody. Please feel free to say hello in the chat. Tell us where you were from. We'd love to see who's with us today. Just some housekeeping to begin. There'll be 2 sections of this conversation. The first, I'm going to invite our global advisory group to share some of their ideas, examples, and have a bit of discussion between us. And then it's your turn. So there will be a Q&A at the end. It's your time to be able to ask questions to all of the incredible people that we have as part of this conversation. And so please post your questions in the YouTube live link, and we will be able to see them and have a conversation around them. So now we'll get on with the session. So as I said, this is the session with the members of the Seoul Global Social Advisory Group. So we as an advisory group have been working with Seoul over the last 5 years, supporting the city government to think about social innovation and on their social innovation strategy. It's definitely been an exchange and a 2-way learning. So we've been bringing global examples, but we've been doing as much learning ourselves, walking the streets of Seoul and learning about the amazing examples that have been happening there. And we see it as our job to communicate that globally. Indeed, Seoul has become a leading example for social innovation over the last 10 years, a truly people-powered city, a city that's been designed around its citizens, but not enough people know. So we see it as our job in our legacy of our advisory work to try and share this with the rest of the world. And part of that sharing is the session today. I'm going to first introduce the advisory group, and then we'll get into the session. So we have an incredible group of people from all over the world. Let me start by introducing Ezio Manzini. So Ezio is an Italian designer, an academic, author, best known for his work on leading design for social innovation and sustainability around the world. He's also an honorary professor at the Politecnico di Milano and the chair and professor at the University of Arts London. There is many more, but I will stop there. You will learn from Ezio shortly. Peter Ramsden is with us as well. Peter comes from the UK, and he's a European expert in urban.
네, 그리고 피터 램스덴님께서 영국에서 오셨는데요. 도시정책, 사회혁신 전문가십니다. 보통 런던에서 활동하시는데 요새는 프랑스에 계시는 것으로 알고 있는데요. 그래서 도시간 난제 해결 사례 공유 활동을 하고 계시고요. 20년 동안 지방정부, 교육, 또 유럽집행위원회 쪽에 일을 많이 하셨습니다. 에이다 왕님.
Good afternoon, Ada. Ada did many things. It's very complex to tell her complex story very quickly, just like Seoul. But she founded the Hong Kong Institute of Contemporary Culture, a unique non-profit organization whose mission is education innovation. And she's also a creative civil society expert. And among many of the projects that she's been working on, she also founded Hong Kong's only art high school, which she's a school supervisor still. And of course, the Make a Difference Institute, which many of you will know her from. We move to India and welcome Anil Gupta. Thank you for joining us and being part of this group, Anil. Anil is an incredible Indian scholar in the area of grassroots innovation, and he will share some of his thinking today. He's founder of the Honeybee Network. If you don't know it, please go and look it up. He's retired as a full-time professor at the moment at the Indian Institute of Management, where he served for about 36 years and works with governments, regional and central, across India. Gabriella, welcome Gabriella, who is currently based in.
네, 그다음에 암스테르담에서 일하고 계시는 가브리엘라 고메즈 몬트님이십니다. 원래는 멕시코 출신이시고, 네, 멕시코 시티의 최고 콘텐츠 책임자를 역임을 하셨고요.
The Lab for the City.
네, 그래서 멕시코 시티 라보라토리 발라 시티라는 프로그램을 설립하고 직접
well placed to be part of this group and conversation today. And she's been working with an interdisciplinary team, so brings lots and lots of different perspectives. And finally, I'd like to introduce Jeff Mulgan, who is the chair of the advisory group, and we'll start our conversation today. Sir Jeff Mulgan, CB, is Professor of Collective Intelligence, Public Policy and Social Innovation at University College London, here in London. He was also Chief Executive of Nesta, had various different roles with the UK government, and also was the first CEO of the Young Foundation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Jeff to begin this conversation and explain a little bit about the complex picture, the complex story of Seoul's social innovation journey. Over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Louise. And it's very good to be back in Seoul, even if only in 2 dimensions rather than 3 dimensions. And with this wonderful group, I've had great experiences walking the streets, talking to people, being inspired by projects. So I think I'll just give one little sort of starting flavor, partly of why we're so interested in the Seoul story and the lessons it has for the rest of the world. My very first job was working in the city government of London, and I've worked with many cities since then. And I think always the city halls tend to see the city through the eyes of a helicopter. You can't help it, as it were, especially a city of 5 or 10 million people. And what's been so interesting in the last few years is seeing Seoul try to turn that on its head and see the city from the ground up, from the grassroots as well. And I was very struck by this, but my first ever visit to Seoul was at the invitation of a previous mayor, Lee Myung-bak, in the mid-2000s. He'd just finished the Cheonggyecheon sort of river project, but this was a city hall very much tied into big business, big government, big media, very much looking down on the people and hoping they would be grateful for what was done for them or to them. In the last 10 years, what we've seen as part of this social innovation journey is many attempts to turn the city into something more people-powered. Now, that's partly about listening, and the ear in front of City Hall symbolized that, and many initiatives to involve people more in the life and the decision-making of the city, including democracy platforms and a whole host of ways of opening up the decision-making to millions of people, not just those who were insiders. You'll hear more about our views of what's been happening at the neighborhood level, reinventing the very local space, the walking distance space of the city as where much of life happens, and the many projects to reinvent the neighborhood in Seoul, to create neighborhood governance and so on, for us are very interesting. We're also interested in the ways in which the city tries to live and experience the city. And an example of that was Mayor Park a few years ago in the heat wave, actually going to share the experiences of citizens, a very rare thing, in fact, for mayors to do, but it's about feeling the experience of the city and not just looking at it from the top down or through statistics. We all liked what happened to City Hall, opening that up and the plaza in front of it to become dynamic spaces of civic life and argument and ideas and selling and social enterprises and community projects. That's what the heart of a city should be. But many city halls around the world are sterile, bureaucratic, cold, and forbidding to citizens. And we've also been interested in seeing the many ways in which the city has backed grassroots projects, let them have their own dynamism, their own momentum, their own direction, rather than try to force them to fit into the plans of the administration. So these are just a few of the ways in which we've seen social innovation become more part of the bloodstream of Seoul. As Louise said, it's a complicated, uneven story. These things always are. Cities are, their very virtue is their organic nature. But we think Seoul has many, many lessons to teach the rest of the world, because on all of these fronts, other cities around the world are experimenting too. And I hope that interchange, that cross-pollination can continue in the years ahead. Thanks, Louise.
Thank you, Jeff, for starting us off. So let's dive into some of those issues that Jeff introduced. I'm going to start by inviting our first pair of advisors, Gabriela and Ezio, to share. So Gabriela and Ezio come from very different cities. You know, Mexico, a city in size comparable to Seoul, Ezio from much smaller European experience. But the reason we put them together is they're going to both share something about scale and proximity and how to get close to the citizens. So even the biggest cities in the world are made up of neighborhoods. They're made up of people working at a human scale. It's at that scale that the everyday life happens. But as Jeff said, too often these things are ignored by city planners, by that helicopter view. So my question to Ezio and Gabriela is, how do city planners balance that level of the helicopter view and the human scale? And I'll go to Gabriela first and then come on to Ezio, who will tell more of a story of proximity. Gabriela.
Good morning, everybody. I'm incredibly happy to be here once again with all of you. Being able to share ideas both with Seoul as well as with the advisory committee was such a joy every year. So I think it's actually a great question, and coming from Mexico City, I really and deeply understood how important it is to truly take into account all of the scales of the city, because at the same time that the megalopolis and this helicopter view is actually incredibly true, it cannot be our only view, because as Jeff said, that same helicopter view is comprised not only of neighborhoods, but actually blocks and very individual people. So I feel that one of the things that has to happen, and that Seoul did incredibly well, is to think about the wide sweeping policy that needs to happen the city, all across the city, as well as new tools to be able to do so. So in terms of everything from public transportation that reaches everywhere, to instate a social welfare system that makes the city livable for everybody. And just like all of these foundational resources, in case of Seoul, I think, for example, the concept of sharing city was incredibly interesting because it was wide sweeping policy that covered the city in and of itself, but also had very local repercussions. And I think tools and views on the city, such as spatial justice, become incredibly important because, let's say, in terms of Mexico City, the UN demands 9 square meters of green space per inhabitant. Mexico City has almost that, but some neighborhoods are 42 square meters, others are 3 square meters. So one of the things that I believe Mayor Park did very well is understand that, you know, you need spatial justice. You need to be able to know what neighborhoods need more help, need more social structures around that, need to rebalance budgets, if you will. And then also one of the very important things, how do you not only think of the physical city, but also of the social structuring of the city? There's a new book out by Lorena Hertz, who's from the UK, that's called The Lonely Century. And it turns out that it seems that the loneliness is costing the UK $2 billion every year because it has health issues related to loneliness. So many times we don't think enough, I believe, of the ties between citizens and hence the infrastructure and the policy that is needed to be able to make those ties. So in terms of the neighborhood level, I very much appreciated everything from the maker spaces to the co-working spaces to giving up underutilized spaces to artists and collectives to embedding them within the garment industry and really looking to make transgenerational linkages, if you will, in many ways across the city. So I think that is mostly what needs to be done, not lose sight of the human, the individual humans, the block, the neighborhood, and then all the way to the megalopolis.
Thank you, Gabriela. We can come back to many of these ideas later on. But now I'm going to go to Ezio, who could maybe talk a little bit more about the idea of proximity.
Yes, of course. So by my side too, I'm very super happy to be here with you, even though in distance, unfortunately. And I will go on in this kind of track that has been started by Geoff when he was saying about this idea of building a city starting from the citizens, and also what Gabriela was saying now. And I could make one step forward on this discussion. So the first thing has been for me when I started to collaborate with Mayor Park and all this group is this exceptional astonishment of seeing that it was somebody was capable to look to a city as Seoul, that appeared to me as a big international modern city, as a city of a kind of mesh of neighborhoods. And this is really a very challenging way of looking at the city, and it has been, and it still is, a kind of breaking in the stereotype of what is modernity and what is the city of the modernity. And what is important is not only to make a statement, but to really try to understand what does it mean for the citizens to live in the city. So it's to build the city not only on the idea that the city is done by citizens, that this is obvious, by the everyday life of the people. And this is important because it changes totally the way in which we can consider the making of the city. And the making of the city is not only planning, but it's a mesh of different activities that can be done by different actors at different levels, first of all, by the same citizens. It's important to say that looking in this way has been Seoul as one of the first cities that really moved some concrete steps in this direction, but the direction now is followed also by many other cities in the world. It's a kind of thread of thinking that could be called the city of proximity. That means the city where you can find the majority of what you need for your everyday life in the short distance where you are. So let's say 10, 15 minutes walk, or the 50-minute city has been in the claim of the mayor of Paris. Personally, I tried also to create some contact in between Seoul and the other city in which it happened to me to work, as in Milano or in Barcelona, that are moving in the same way. If we look a little bit more in detail, I think that all the different projects that I've seen that have been developed by Park and his team in this period went in this direction. I can name for sure the most evident one is the one on the villages. so the urban villages promotion, but also, for instance, the one on the independent energy possibility, and the one also a certain way of looking to the smart city if we think to technology not as something that simply push people alone in their own home, but creating network in between people that are living nearby. But the one that I studied more, because it's more nearer to my interest, is the one that's called reaching out to communities service, because it's a very interesting way to see in detail how you can change the idea of what is, in this case, a service for caring services, in something that is not only some offices, maybe also distributed, maybe neighborhood offices, but playing an administrative role towards being really community center. And what you have to do to make this kind of double shift, it means to distribute the services on the territory, on the city in this case, and to transform them in from offices in community services, and to empower people in being capable to participate to this incredible possibility. So this very detailed way of looking how you can practically participate in the building of this distributed city, or this city of proximity, is one of the learning that I had from observing what has been done in Seoul, and it has been very important for me too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezio, for that. We're going to jump onto our next pair now, which is Ada and Peter, to build on a little bit of what Ezio just talked about, and we're really thinking about how do we grow relationships with empathy between the citizens and the city. So for people to feel empowered in their own lives, we think it's vital that they have a say in how their neighborhoods are run, not just at the scale of districts, which in Seoul is often a district is the size of a small nation, but also at a smaller level. So I'm going to go to Peter first, and I would hope you could elaborate on what kind of governance models we need to work at this neighborhood level effectively. A riveting conversation, but extremely important.
Thanks very much, Louise. I hope everyone can hear me. So hearing Jeff say about his first job in Greater London Council back in the 80s took me back to my second job was as a neighborhood organizer in a small housing estate in Hackney, which is in northeast London. And I worked there for about 3.5 years. And in a way, that's never left me. So my view that things can start in the neighborhood has always been with me. And what I saw in Seoul was an attempt to do this across a whole global city rather than in just one neighborhood. And I think that's always been the challenge, that it's been relatively easy to make 1 or 2 pilots work, to make something happen in 1 or 2 places. But the idea of making it happen in a whole city has defeated most mayors across the world. And what I wanted to say was really that what we need in order to move in that direction is what Seoul has been trying to do, which is to try and use a top-down framework to enable bottom-up activity. And so it sounds like a contradiction, you know, how can a big city stimulate neighborhood energy? But this is what we see in the most radical, the most progressive cities across the world, and Seoul has obviously been leading the way. Seoul took a model which had developed out of an urban village, which was in a sense an organic model. It had happened by itself, almost in opposition to the city, to protect and develop a hilltop area in Seongmisan. But it took that as a model and saying, well, neighbors, people in parts of the city can do it for themselves, but we need to help them. And I think that's the crucial question. And I suppose the 2 examples I've referenced in the paper are in Lisbon and in Berlin. And they too have done something very, very similar. in Berlin for 20 years now, they've established what they call quartiers management, but it's really a decentralized approach to bringing local community councils together in an informal way to decide on projects, to allocate budgets, and to make things happen in difficult neighborhoods. So that's one example. Lisbon does something also quite similar, which is it has an annual competition, which they call BIP Zip, and it brings it allows projects to be brought forward by a minimum of 2 organizations, and they do about 50 to 70 projects a year. Both of these are very similar in essence, which is that they've used a citywide approach in the same way that Seoul has done, but they've allowed the neighborhood to then form, and in Seoul this is more like a neighborhood committee, and this can then make decisions and bring forward recommendations, some sort of action plan. And I think one final point I would make is that it's not, you can't be naive about this. Not everyone in the neighborhood agrees. Not everyone agrees with the city about the future of the neighborhood. There are tensions which need working through and discussion. And also neighbors or citizens at local level don't have all the skills. They need technical assistance, they need support, they need a listening. In fact, they need capacity, but so does the city itself, so do the city officials. They need to have new skills, a new, more listening culture to understand that while a citizen might not be an expert in architecture, they are an expert about their neighborhood. And so this new, on both sides, both the public officials and the citizen needs to move forward, and that capacity needs time. So Seoul has illustrated this in moving from what I would call a rough demolish and build culture, where older neighborhoods were just torn down and replaced with high rise, to at least looking at what's in the neighborhood, looking at the assets that are there, and beginning a process of dialogue with citizens, which can, over time, create much more interesting, much more creative, and much more inclusive, most importantly, neighborhoods. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And maybe Ada, you can build on that point about the building capacity, both in civil servants and public officials, but also in citizens, because a lot of your work, both in Seoul, but also in Hong Kong and across Asia, is about building that capacity and encouraging co-creation and experimentation with each other. And so could you elaborate a little bit on what you think other Asian cities in particular can learn from Seoul's model of co-creating and experimenting with citizens so effectively?
Yes, thank you, Louise. Hello, everyone. Really happy to join this panel discussion, although I would prefer being in Seoul at this very moment. Every year for the past few years, November is a lovely time in Seoul, and we've all been there. So we hope that we can visit Seoul very soon. And Louise is right. In my work in Hong Kong, I always try to bridge the gap. So on one side, there's the government. On the other side, we have a lot of people with diverse views. What I've learned from Mr. Park's governance is not just his very catchy phrase, let the citizens of Seoul be the mayors of Seoul, but how he walked the talk and how he actually spent a lot of resources to build platforms and to build intermediaries, to find the right method and the right process to really make meaningful conversation happen between the government and the people. And I think this sort of co-creation is very rare in Asia. And perhaps, that is perhaps the first thing that we can think about more in other Asian cities as we move on, in particular in the post-pandemic times. Talking about cooperative government, I would just like to cite one very quick example. Last year in June, I took a number of young people from Hong Kong to visit community projects in Seoul. And one site we went was the Gusan Community Library. Like a lot of the libraries in Seoul, this one was actually thought about, from co-creation. But what I thought was amazing was that the civil servants were very happy to participate. And so, for example, the residents have different ideas, patchy ideas about what the library should look like. But then, the civil servants are quite happy to shape the proposals professionally, and then later on got a budget for it. And so this is the kind of bottom-up and top-down cooperation which happened in many, many projects in Seoul. And another thought is what I've also witnessed firsthand, and that is Mr. Park, together with his good friend, Mr. Yu Chang-bok, who is the founder of the Sumisan village that Peter talked about. Together, they created a local lab initiative. So what the local lab was that they believed in the power of three. So 3 citizens got together, and the community organizers are very happy to understand their views, to have deep listening. But what is more important is that it is also a public education process to enable the citizens with diverse views to build trust and to have empathy towards each other. So to be able to step into the other person's shoes and understand their own different requests and plights. So I think, this is very important, because we are not, so naive to think that it is so easy to build trust between government, citizens, and also between citizens, because society is very divided these days, and it is certainly not easy to do that. But I talked to Mr. Yu, and I went to Samyangdong, where he worked together with the community organizers, and I see how they have done a lot of capacity building programs, capacity for the civil servants on the how to build new relationships with residents, as well as workshops for civil society on the good practices of direct democracy and citizens' empowerment. And so to conclude, I think, this kind of intermediary is important. And this is actually very important also for mayors and for cities around the world to think how to build these intermediary platforms to enable more meaningful conversation and more direct decisions, and so that the ideas can be fused in the field. I was very touched by Mr. Yu, who said that, yes, there are diverse opinions, but if we look to the field, we call on everybody who wants to solve the problem to come together, they can solve it. So I think this kind of optimism and hope is the brand of Mr. Park's legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ada. I'm going to change gears slightly to think a little bit about how to tap into the collective intelligence and the people really of a city by using technology. Lots of cities, of course, are excited by the idea of smart cities, and really in that vision, they mainly focus on the hardware in their vision for their city. In fact, as you drive in from the airport from Incheon into Seoul, you can see that very much. Many big hardware projects like Songdo, which is very, very clear on your drive in. But Seoul does something different and redefined smartness in terms of a capability, not just focusing on the hardware tech. So Jeff, could you tell us a little bit about how Seoul did that redefining of the smart city, please?
Well, thanks. And I think this is a project still underway in Seoul as around the world. As Louise said, for most of the last 20 years, there's been a lot of hype and energy and events and investment around smart cities. And usually that has meant a picture of the city transformed by hardware, new kind of smart lampposts or infrastructures, buildings monitoring who's coming and going, air and so on. Now, much of that is fine. but it's unfortunately left places which are rather soulless, inhuman, not very likable. And you can take your own view on somewhere like New Songdo about whether that is an attractive vision, but mainly around the world, these places haven't worked commercially or in social terms. So in the last few years, there's been a sort of shift to try and redefine what a smart city is, less in terms of just physical hardware, but more in terms of how to tap really the collective intelligence of the society, the citizens, and the city. And Seoul has definitely been part of that movement. And it probably has 5 main strands I'll mention very briefly each. The first is about data. To some extent, the traditional smart city vision was of data being extracted by big companies, as Facebook and Google do as core to their business model, whereas an alternative tries to link data to solve common shared public problems. Seoul has been at the forefront of that for many years on things like transport planning, this year around COVID and the COVID response, in many ways with methods of orchestrating data which are a generation ahead of North America or Europe. There are all sorts of issues with that kind of data linking. How do you protect privacy? But this is key to solving the problems of the city in the next generation. A second theme has been turning the smart city into test beds, experiments where people are involved in trying out the new ideas, the Internet of Things ideas. So Bukchon, for example, had a very live test bed on next generation IoT, but with much more engagement from communities than the equivalents in other countries, which are often done in greenfield sites where there isn't an existing community to take part in saying what they like or what they don't like, and bringing together the startups, the officials, and the community in an interactive way. Thirdly, one of the crucial issues of a smart city has to be that there's not a big imbalance of skills and capabilities. In much of the world, there's huge technical expertise in the Ciscos, the IBMs, these big companies, or Samsung for that matter, but very little capability for citizens or for NGOs or community groups. And so a lot of distrust flows from that. And Seoul is one of the cities which has tried to redress that with big data academies and training programs and support for NGOs to become more technologically adept. A fourth theme has been linking into the more grassroots movements around digital and digital social innovation, the maker movement, open data, blockchain, in which Seoul has been a pioneer with lots of extraordinary projects and initiatives. And here I think the key is for a city to be willing to talk, to be open to dialogue, not just with the very big corporate visions of the smart city, but these more social movement approaches to digital. And then finally, there's using digital as a tool for democracy. And again, Seoul, through its democracy platform and other tools, has been one of the cities making it easier for thousands, if not millions of people to start taking part in proposing ideas, commenting, voting, and being part of, as it were, the everyday life of decision making. And I think in all of that, you can see the beginnings of a vision of a smart city, which is much more about mobilizing the collective brain power, the citizens, as well as the data and the technology, not just a very top-down, hardware-driven vision. And this year, in some ways, has been a crucial year in this, because in March, Google's attempt to create, with Sidewalk Labs in Toronto, its vision of the future smart city was cancelled, mainly because of resistance from the citizens, the community, who felt this wasn't really for them. They didn't have a place in that very hardware engineering vision, despite huge amounts of investment and hype and backing from the national government. And I think all over the world, we will see a further swing away from that rather sterile view of what smartness is towards one which is hopefully more people-powered. And since Seoul has for many years been the most connected city on the planet in terms of broadband speeds, mobile speeds, etc., I'm sure Seoul will play a crucial part in showing what that means in practice, how a city can be smart in that much deeper sense, which goes beyond hardware and sensors in lampposts.
Thank you, Jeff. And so we'll go to Anil now to maybe build a little bit more on this deeper sense of building on the citizens' capacities. One of the things that we think is so special about Seoul is its ability to think big and see small and really harness the creativity of the citizens in the city. And as advisors, we spent hours walking the streets of Seoul, breathing the air, experiencing the sound, the smells, the spaces. And that was a key part of the mayor's approach as well. So Anil, could you tell us a little bit more about your perspective on how we should see cities differently? What are some of the ways that we should see or experience different perspectives that are so important for the creativity of our cities today?
Thank you, Louis. The very fact that when mayoral office moved, in some sense, Mayor Park walked with his office to the margins of the city. And as you know, I have argued in my book that minds on the margin are not marginal minds. And it was established. It was established when he listened to the people, learned from them, and leveraged the wisdom that emerged from these decentralized local community-based meetings or interactions. To me, this seems to be the way, very much in line with what Gandhian philosophy is, where you allow communities to design their destiny by participating among themselves and, of course, with the state and society as it could be. So I would suggest that one of the lessons that emerges from our walks in Seoul, but also the walks that I have been pursuing in our own country as a Shodhyatra learning walks. You may know that I have walked in every state of our country in India over the last 25, 30 years. And one lesson which comes out is that you will never stop being surprised about the creative innovation that people develop on their own. Now, if they could do so much with so little, how much more they can do if there was support and there was encouragement and there was a little bit of risk funding by the state, by the society, by the city councils. So the second lesson is that can city councils engage with communities both ways? One, by throwing challenges of the problems which need to be resolved and for which, let's say, the available solutions don't fit. So there are gaps. The unmet needs are still there. When Mayor Park decided to stay in the hot summer in an apartment on the top floor to experience the heat that people who have no air conditioning face. Now, there could be some very creative solutions of cooling without air conditioning. Look, heat exchangers for that matter, or maybe some other low-cost solutions could come out if this was the challenge issued by the Innovation Council or Innovation Office in the Mayor's office today, and so many ideas will come out both from the communities and so from the students and the technologists. So third lesson would be that can we throw challenges to the communities to solve problems frugally, disregarding how much resources a city or a country may have. The need for frugal solutions will remain because then so much more can be done with the available resources. We can cover so many more dreams and fulfill them if we had more resources. So there should never be a case for very costly solutions for solving problems for which, let's say, frugal solution exists. I also feel that when we went to the old city and I have seen the way, as Jeff mentioned just now, the technology was used for regulating the traffic of the tourists to the site. I think technology could also be used to bring out the creativity and innovation of the people. So they're a platform where artists can share their artwork, not only virtually, but also in the real spaces. There are spaces where artists can leave their work, where sculptors can leave sculptures, where musicians can perform. In other words, a place where a squirrel, an ant, and an artist all jostle with each other in a common space. So I believe there's a lot of space, a lot of scope for cities to have aesthetic commons, knowledge commons, the institutional commons, technology commons, so that one can pool the best of the knowledge and best of the skills that young people have, that the elderly people have, and make the city much more inclusive and livable. I would also suggest that there's a need for us to recognize that when you create commons, of course, the laws of the city and the federal laws may come in conflict, as it happened in the case of railway commons. But the lesson from that case was that one should still try. Who knows that the federal laws will change? When we started, we conceived an idea of a district innovation fund. Can you imagine with 600-700 districts, you could get 2 crore of rupees, about $400,000-500,000 to every district for supporting innovations. So one should never underestimate the power of small initiatives, city initiatives changing the federal policy. And I think there are examples where the walking style of the mayor was actually, to my mind, generalized by many other cities. So there was a lesson here that when you learn, when you listen, when you learn, when you leverage ideas, you also need to support ideas. And for supporting, we need to create kind of risk funds. We need to create challenge funds. We need to create innovation funds at the ward level, at the county level, not just at the city council level, so that it becomes easier for people to present their ideas to the committee. And after debate, if committee says, yes, let's go ahead with this, then they go ahead. How a small self-help group, for example, a library inspect in one of the committee became an energy village. That was a powerful example that in which the people were brought together by community themselves through a library. And then they realized that why can't they become self-reliant in the energy? So they became net zero community. That means they were producing as much energy as they were taking, or less than that. So I would say that there are many initiatives, many lessons that one can learn from the legacy of Seoul innovation initiatives. And I think these are only some of them that I mentioned. I would also wish that children who have to live the longest in the cities, or for that matter anywhere in the world, must also be engaged as problem solvers, as dreamers about the city, as a participant in the city's design and future. And I would believe that if this could be done as we have done in our country, harness the idea of the children, we could do wonders with the future design, which could be frugal, which could be friendly, and which could also be very flexible.
Thank you so much, Anil. I'm actually going to move, we have so many questions. I'm going to move on to the questions from the participants, and then I will end by sharing some of my thoughts on how Mayor Park and the city of Seoul have used space so effectively to enable a lot of this to happen. And I will also end with a special question from me to all of you advisors. But I would like to move to the questions, as there's been so many already. Please feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat. If we can't get to them all now, I promise we will get to them all in some other way offline. But Anil, I'd like to just keep going on your train of thought, please, because one of the questions that came in from the audience was, how can schools and teachers be part of this kind of community engaged initiative? And is there a way that youth can elevate their voices as citizens? So could you build on what you just said and give us a couple of examples, please?
Yeah, this is music to my ear. This is such a wonderful question, because I will share with you the experiments that we have done at different scales and demonstrate to you that this process of involving children and the youth in engaging with the unmet needs, in engaging with as an action researcher in solving problems, can be so powerful, where even teachers will learn from the children. They can democratize the classroom. If children feel that they have to sit in our country, many school children sit on the ground and teachers sit on the chair, and children ask the question, why should you sit on the chair when we are on the ground? And you better sit with us. And the teacher agreed. So they can learn to use their power at an early age by changing the asymmetry in power between teacher and taught. So teachers must encourage children to ask questions about their own conduct. And if the children feel that someday their teachers have come unprepared, children should have a right to comment on that. That today, teacher, you don't seem to be prepared because you're avoiding our questions. You're not giving answers straightforwardly. So there could be a very democratization. How can children learn to use democratic civil power at the young age? They can learn by engaging with the source of power, in this case, teacher, and the principal for that matter, by questioning them. Second thing that can be done, and which we have done in many places, is engaging children of class 4, 5, 6 to do research. So they go out to the communities and ask questions about the problem that they're bothering them, the craftsmen, the elderly people, the vendors, the farmers, the mechanics, come back, analyze the problems, and then present to all the remaining children, but also to the other experts. And I can tell you that I have been surprised by the originality of their imagination and the creativity that they have. We have been giving awards. We now call it Ignited Mind Award, named after former President Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. And on 15th October, we gave these awards. You could find them on our website. These awards signify the fact that children can solve problems. To give you an example, children saw a problem of traffic crowding, traffic congestion. Most cities have the traffic congestion. So one kid from Bihar came out with an answer. He said, look, instead of 3 lights, red, orange, and green, there should be 4th light. 4th light. Nobody in the world has seen 4th light. They said, yes, there should be a blue light. What would blue light tell us? Blue light will tell you that there is a congestion ahead, take a turn, either take a U-turn, take a left turn, or take a right turn, but don't go forward. You will waste your hours in the congestion. Now, how beautiful. How beautiful. Coming from a child, not from a traffic inspector, not from a designer, not from a senior expert of traffic management, but from a child. Now, these kind of ideas are plentiful that we have come across over the years. And this can show that if children can learn to solve problems at an early age, they can become a born designer, so to say. They will start analyzing the problems in a different way. They will consider themselves as a part of problem-solving community and not as someone who's a sink of sermons. My appeal to the friend is who has asked this question, that very often we, the teachers, treat children as a sink of sermons. Do this, do that, rather than as a source of ideas. And I'm saying, let us have a transition from sink to source. Children should become source of ideas. Further, one more experiment I will share, if you permit me for one more minute. And recently, during the pandemic, when children were at home in the villages, in 248 to be precise, the schools, GYAN, Grassroots Innovation Augmentation Network, a honeybee network institution, Anamika and her colleagues sent 15, 16 seeds of native varieties of pulses, of different crops, vegetables, to these schools, so that they grow the vegetable. When children come back to school, they should see the green nurseries and green plants from which the vegetables can be used for midday meal scheme to provide nutrition to the children. Now, if children can learn the process of growing seeds and plants and conserving biodiversity by being an actor in that process rather than just reading in the class, their lesson will remain with them. They will become the future climate champion. They will become the future biodiversity champion because they would have participated in that process. So I strongly believe in action learning. I believe that we should engage children in as many activities as possible where they would deal with nature, they will deal with the authority, they will deal with the power, they will deal with the unmet needs, and slowly begin to shape their preferences, their perceptions, and their agency, so to say. Many times, and let me conclude on this point, that we, the elderly people, have a lot of autonomy. What we lack is agency. Autonomy is freedom to take decision. Agency is willingness and capacity to use that freedom. And many times we keep quiet when we see injustice, when we see inequity, when we see unfairness. Our children should not be born with this culture. Our generation has done enough by being a mute witness to a lot of inequities in our society, but our children should not be. They should learn to participate in the process of change right from early age. And I'm confident that they can be. So they can solve problems, they can question the asymmetry in power, they can question the pedagogies that are oppressive sometimes or not open enough to let children question and change the world. And I would hope that if it can be done. Similarly, youth can be involved. We have a database called as techpedia.in. We have mapped the mind of technology youth, 200,000 engineering projects, information of 200,000 engineering projects done by 550,000 students of our country is available free of cost. No password, no ID required. Just go there at techpedia.in and you find the information. If Korea could do that, if UK could do that, so much learning will take place among the youth. Italy could do that. Hong Kong could do that. I mean, the idea is that youth is a huge power and they can solve problems playfully. They don't even become very possessive about their intellectual property and so on. The open innovation is something very natural to a large number of young people. They believe in sharing. It is our institutions that make them close-minded. So I would say children and youth both can be very powerful drivers of open innovations, inclusive innovations in our society.
Thank you, Anil. I certainly need a blue traffic light as well, and I hope that other cities will also be inspired by harnessing the power of our young people and children. Peter, would you like to just build on the answering that schools question as well, please?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm muted there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. And that should be the phrase of 2020, Zoomed. Anyway, I actually, when I was in my 20s, or late 20s, I worked as a high school teacher. And I was interested in bringing the city into the classroom and taking the classroom out to the city, as you might imagine. And we had a technique which was developed by a guy from Nottingham called Tony Gibson, called Planning for Real, where we would build a very rough model of a part of the neighborhood. And I ran with this with whole classes. It's very un-Korean in the sense that I know that Korean education is very formal. But we got children talking and young people talking in a way that I had never seen these same young people talking in any other class about their own neighborhood, because they knew every nook and cranny. They knew every part of their neighborhood. So you build a very rough model using cereal packets and anything you can get, any piece of cardboard, but based on an accurate map. And then you film a discussion across that across that model, where you ask key questions of the young people. You ask them what do they like, what don't they like, what would they like to change. And you can do this in any setting. You don't have to do it in school. You can do it in a youth meeting. You can do it anywhere, in a market stall. And it produces them, as Anil was saying, it produces the most extraordinary answers because, in fact, as adults, we've lost a lot of our sensory perception. We no longer even smell the city in the same way that children do. They would tell me which parts were stinky and which parts were dangerous for them. Anyway, it was a fascinating exercise. It's very easy to do. It's called Planning for Real, and it's well documented. I'll stop there because I know we're running out of time.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to ask Ada as well, because Ada's done a lot of work with young people and harnessing their capacities and bringing them into participatory processes. But at the same time, Ada, after you've given your comment on this, could you also answer the question that somebody posed that said, it's actually very interesting to know that there is an Asian city that has such a group of international advisors. So it'd be great if you could share how you think Seoul City has benefited from that international input. And I will go as far as to suggest that we as a group are available for other cities in the world as well. So Ada.
Yes. Thank you, Louise. When I heard the blue traffic light, I really want to share a case with you, which is still ongoing. So Mr. Park and Mr. Yu Chang-bok and myself, we inspire, each other. And, I have a platform called the Social Lab in Hong Kong. So recently we worked with the transport department who hopes to have more walkability in school zones. And we work with children and neighboring schools. and came up with all sorts of designs for the road signs within that school zone. And now the transport department has agreed to manufacture one of those designs, and guess what it is? So it's a roundish school sign. On one side it says school in big letters. On the other side there's a big turtle, and it's a green turtle. And so I guess, as a driver, you drive into the school zone and you immediately see this turtle sign and school, so you can't miss it. And this is now being manufactured and will be installed from December onwards at several sites. So I do look forward to this experiment on the ground to see whether it works. Now, this is actually, a real case, and it shows that we do need to incorporate the views and ideas and the creativity of young people and schools. And to answer the question, I think our group, we have known each other for a long time. We congregate in Seoul at least once a year. I can't say that I have inspired the Seoul government or I actually learn from them, and I try to expand my practice in particular, like in the social lab areas. But I think one aspect which I found very, very, to me, insightful is to have young people from both cities collaborating with each other, as I've done so in the Make a Difference forums and in also Make a Difference trips, such that the Hong Kong young people with different ideas in mind will come to Seoul, will visit the Seoul Innovation Park, a lovely place, will go to the youth hub where they have got lots of young people and civic incubators. And there, we work with each other. So I do think that this collaboration between cities in Asia should really continue in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ada. I'm going to go back to Gabriella now, because lots of people have been asking about this question of working at multiple scales. We're so inspired by all these tiny, small scale examples. But what do you think really makes the kind of top down and bottom up work well? How do we find that balance? You've had this experience yourself in Mexico. Could you tell us a little bit more on your perspective on that, please?
Absolutely. I think one of the things not to lose when scaling and when thinking about this, switching from one scale to another, is the nuance, especially of what works really well at a neighborhood level. So keeping with the conversations of children, in Mexico City, one of my teams at the lab was called the Playful City team. And so basically they had two missions. One of them is, how do we think of play as a city making tool? And the other one is, how do we actually look at Mexico City through a children's perspective? Because believe it or not, Mexico City has almost 4 million kids on a metropolitan level under age 14. So that's, a whole country basically made out of children. But policy has never really been made around kids. So first of all, one of the things that we started doing, as I mentioned, spatial justice is something very important, of understanding that some neighborhoods have a lot more to offer the citizens than others. And so we started finding hotspots across the city to how many children lived block by block. And we could cross that with a tool that we had with the index of marginalization and segregation, and then cross that again with lack of access to public space. So we very quickly got hotspots across the city. And we started working both on the short term with play streets, of allowing neighborhoods and neighbors to close down streets so children can play where there is no public space. But we also started working with the urban planning department to create, to rescue public spaces in these places that were especially drastic. So that's kind of like the overview, and that's one scale. But then how do you go back to the scale of the children? And as Anil very well pointed out, to the ideas of children. So we put out a call for proposals for artists and designers that could actually bring in ideas of how to create new typologies of playgrounds. So instead of doing the copy paste of these plastic playgrounds that you see everywhere, I mean, playgrounds in and of themselves should be wildly imaginative and provoke free play as well. So we got a mix of people that are experts in pedagogy, artists, designers, but we then also created tools so that they could work with the children of the neighborhood. So nobody that made a proposal could not pass through these sessions with kids from the neighborhoods. And so building tools for them to be able to create these collaborations was incredibly interesting. Now, when in another projects where we were creating public space where there is none, because Mexico City started 60% informally, it was truly interesting to see that at the beginning there was a lot of pushback by the neighbors. So it becomes very important to actually create this is a collective endeavor of not only to convince them to bring them, but to bring them on board in terms of ideas and proposals. So this is, I think, the really interesting scale to travel is how do you know that this needs to be citywide policy and work on the hotspots, for example, but then how do you also have very deep work with the neighbors and with children so that that doesn't get lost in translation when you're just like trying to replicate like crazy. So I have the feeling that one of the interesting challenges of any megalopolis, and Seoul is definitely one of those, is how to keep both of those alive in terms of a very intimate, very human scale, and at the same time this vision for a megalopolis, if you will, and of what is possible. I think that what Seoul has been doing in terms of that social mesh that Ezio and I mentioned at the beginning is important because this becomes an enabling environment. Like this has to happen before the projects pop up. You need very intimate circuits. You need very good deep listening. You need neighborhood level organizations, and then ideas can come in much deeper and much quicker and then scale up without losing that intimacy and that nuance.
So building on what you just said, Gabriela, about creating that enabling environment and making sure that the conditions are in place for these things to be able to happen when you need them to. I wonder whether we could go to Jeff and ask you the question that came in the chat that said, you know, with Mayor Park's charming leadership, Seoul City has obviously achieved a lot in the past few years, driving social innovation, etc. But rather than thinking about what the conditions were to enable that to happen in the first place, the question is really focused on how do we continue this momentum? What do we need to do to make sure this continues?
Well, perhaps I'll just make one comment on young people before answering your question. I think it relates. So I unfortunately live in a country where if you asked the schools minister what he thought about what had just been said by Gabriela and Ada and Anil, he would be appalled. He would say the job of schools and universities is for children to sit passively in classrooms and absorb knowledge. And there's a very strong movement around the world which still sees education like this, does not want children getting out to solve the problems of the city, to work in teams, to do all the things which I think others think are great. And we have a country where power over schools is very centralized. Exactly the same applies to universities. 150 million students worldwide who could be an extraordinary resource working with cities to solve problems, working with communities at the frontiers of science and social change. Some are beginning to do that, but in most places we're still stuck in a very 20th century paradigm where their job is just to absorb knowledge and then repeat it in exams. Now, what that points to, I think, is the answer to your question. We want innovation in a city not to depend on a single leader, a single mayor, a single bit of circumstances. Ideally, we want these things just to be part of the DNA, to be institutionalized, to be normal. And that is what has happened in the last 100 years to science. Science and scientific R&D does not depend on a particular mayor or president or business leader. It's embedded in people's jobs, in funds, in labs, in institutions. And that's what's given us this year the extraordinary speed of progress on vaccines for COVID. That has only happened because innovation is embedded in institutions and fueled by money. The same is true in business, where again, you don't need an individual leader of Google or Apple or Pfizer to drive things. It's part of how they work. And what I think we need to do in the next 10 or 20 years in cities is a comparable embedding of innovation. So it simply is part of how things happen, with dedicated funds, test beds, labs, where it's built into part of the daily life of schools that at least some of the time kids are working on problem solving, where it's built into the daily life of universities that they mobilize their academics, their students to work on real life problem solving. And I think that is achievable. At the moment, it still depends on individuals. A great current example in Europe is Tirana in Albania, one of the poorest cities in Europe, but where the mayor is mobilizing children to rethink congestion and streets, replacing roads with parks, doing all the things we would like to see. But if that mayor goes, it will probably all stop there. So I think all of us need to move from, as it were, the individual spark, which is vital and important, to think, how do we make this everyday, normal, and just common sense? Otherwise, we risk having cycles of energy and innovation, and then, as it were, innovative recessions following them as soon as the crucial people leave. And this must be the challenge for every city on the planet. How do we, in an everyday way, tap the collective creativity of the citizens?
Thanks, Jeff. I have a final question for Ezio, and then I will take the moderator's privilege of asking you all a final question. So Ezio, somebody asked in the chat for you to expand on why proximity matters, particularly in topics like care that you mentioned. You know, why, and why is it hard for city planners and people to think at the level of, in the narrative of proximity? So why does it matter, but also why is that so hard?
Yes, thank you. Well, there is somebody that says that if we want to talk about care, we have to talk about being touched. So you cannot have real care without touching somebody, or at least being touched. And care is mutual, because I touch in something and somebody or something, and somebody or something is touching me. So there is a kind of very strict link in between the notion about care and the proximity. Because if it is true what I'm saying, and it's not, I'm not only myself that is saying, it's said by a line of thinking about care, it means that you cannot have a caring society if there is no proximity. And proximity means also the physical proximity, that the people are in some way in touch. And therefore, if we want to move toward a sustainable society, there must be also a caring society. And caring is not only caring for the people, but is also caring for the planet. You have to be physically in touch with things. And this brings us to the idea of proximity. Obviously, today, the proximity in a connected world is not exactly the same that in the past, because in the past, in some way, our sphere of action was mandatory, the one of proximity. So we were in proximity in doing everything from personal things to work. Now we know very well that we can have part of our life that is not physically in proximity. But people think, and I also think that we should also use technology to bring back actions and functions near to the people. So one of the ideas of the city of proximity is very much using technology to bring in the system that generates services, from the care services to the services related to permit people to work, to every kind of services, to bring the service encounter near to where the people live. And this is technologically possible. This is one way of thinking to the smart city, a city that has this kind of capabilities. So I think that I try to say we have a caring society is a society based on proximity, and proximity today is a kind of a hybrid proximity in which you mix the fact to be nearby with what the technology can give you. But if I can go to this kind of thread of young people, I want only to add one point because it's very near to my heart. One of the main activities that I've done in the past period is to organize the DESIS, that is a network of activity done in the universities to work towards society. And what is very important to be said, that at least in Europe, there is something that is valuable for universities and could be spread also to other schools. And I don't know how much is in Asia, that is called the third mission. And this goes to the idea of institutionalize something. So how important is to institutionalize, to make stable something. So the notion of third mission is that the university have not only to teach the normal third things, not only to research, but they have to have a role, direct role for what they do into the society. So I think that this third mission, to imagine that every kind of action, now I extrapolate it also if you are in a business, if you are in a whatever kind of activity, should be considered also by the point of view that they can have a impact, a positive impact in the society. And this could be a way, in some way, to positively institutionalize all the creativity that was mentioned before. So we state that the school has a role, not only to teach, but also to play some kind of role into the society.
Thank you, Ezio. So I will go to my final question, and you all have literally 1 minute, 60 seconds each, and I will cut you off if you go over. And Ezio, I'm going to start by asking you first, since you have the mic. But what should then, if we're thinking about our future cities and all of the things we've talked about today, and continuing to build this momentum and build the capacities of people and their creativity and really build on the energy of the young people, what should the next generation of urban social innovators be doing? And of course, it is many things, but if you could all give me one thing, that would be fantastic.
Yes. One thing, and it's one thing with a double face. One is, please remember that the city making is mainly done by people. So your role is to create the condition for people to make their own city. But the second one is, to do that, you have to work a lot, because to create this condition that permit to people to be positively active, you have to create an infrastructure. You have to create a solution that permit to the people to have the knowledge. And in my view, and I conclude, you have also to feed the conversation with ideas, because the people can have a lot of ideas, but maybe they are not in the position to know some possibility or some example that come from outside. Therefore, to create this optimal thing, this infrastructure, learning, empowering, and feeding with good ideas on how to go toward a sustainable society.
Thank you, Ezio. Anil, what do you think the next generation of social innovators, urban social innovators, should do? Anil, you're on mute.
I would say that there are 4 important steps in an innovation ecosystem. We need to search, spread, celebrate innovations, and sense the unmet needs. Now, if every ward, if every community, every neighborhood were to do this, every school and college were to do this, then what will we find? We find a map of unmet needs. So let's say we go to the map of the city, and then map for different counties, we just amplify it, and then we will find out in which county what are the unmet needs. We will also see underutilized resources and unexploited innovative ideas. So people have solution in one place, but it has not been used because nobody in the bureaucracy has patience or interest in converting that idea into practice. As I gave you example of blue light, not many traffic policemen or traffic managers have used this idea. Right there, this idea has been there from 2004 or 5. I mean, for such a long time, this idea has been around us. Why can't we do that? That's one question. So if we can map the unmet needs, we can map the underutilized resources, we can map the unexploited creative ideas, and involve both kind of challenges, which I mentioned earlier. Challenges of the unmet needs of region 1 can be solved by a creative person in region. It is not necessary that anybody who defined the problem must also know the answer. So how do we cross-pollinate, as Honeybee Network does, the needs of one region, unmet needs of one region, with creative spirit of another region, and vice versa. So this kind of a lab, a creative crucible, cities should become crucible of creativity, crucible of compassion, crucible of collaboration, and crucible of cross-pollination. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil. Gabriella, what should the next generation of urban social innovators do?
I think what the world needs right now and what I would love to see are social innovators that are generous and wildly imaginative. So I think that this entails several things. One of them, thinking about generative projects instead of extractive, of really moving into another type of thinking that I believe the planet and the world needs right now. And I think it also entails working very closely together and taking risks, and also perhaps creating very strong links between disciplines. I find that having urban scientists and social scientists working hand in hand with artists and people from the humanities, philosophers, historians, et cetera, will be exactly that, like this space for wild imagination.
Thank you. Peter.
My idea for cities is a little more prosaic in the sense that I'm very interested in this interface between the top down and the bottom up. And I think we need to really work on this, because at the moment it either risks being too informal, in which case it will evaporate in the next with the next mayor of any city, or it's too overstructured and it has no creativity, it has no young people in it. It's boring. So this whole intermediate layer needs to be perhaps reimagined, and perhaps the next generation of social innovators can focus a bit on that to make it institutional without it being boring.
Institutional without boring. Fantastic. Ada.
Yeah, I think what Peter said, I want to really echo. And writing on what I've said about collaboration, about fusion of ideas, about how to really bring the bottom up and the top down together, I can only think of one word, and that is experimentation. I do hope that young social innovators, urban innovators in all cities around the world, they are not afraid to experiment, because only by experimentation and lots of testing could you identify the best ideas and also to implement those ideas. And of course, when I talk about experimentation, it should be cross-sector, it should be with diverse stakeholders, and hopefully, experiments are experiments. Everybody knows it's short term, and that will alleviate some of the risk-averse attitude of governments and mayors. Thank you.
Thanks, Ada. Jeff.
Well, I agree 110% with all that's just been said. So I'll just focus in on a topic. So I think in the next 10 years, whatever happened, cities were going to face huge turbulence in jobs and skills, destruction of jobs, creation of jobs. COVID will exacerbate that, both directly with the recessions many countries are entering now, which will get worse next year, and indirectly because it is speeding up investment in automation and AI, which will speed up the displacement of jobs. So we need at a city level much more attention to jobs and skills, mobilizing data, helping people navigate, probably direct job creation, creating rights to work for people, orienting green investment so it creates opportunities for builders, electricians, and plumbers to get good, decent jobs, and many, many other things. But I think this is a priority because if people don't have a chance to work and feel self-respect, then many, many other things go wrong in a city and in a society. And this will become a more acute problem in 2021.
Thank you, Jeff. I I want to just add one final thing from the perspective of SIX, that we really believe that cities need to, and urban innovators need to really focus on global exchange. You know, a time where we need better global learning and better understanding. Sadly, our nations are becoming more polarized, more closed, more isolated. So I would add that as something else to everything else I agree with. Thank you all for your time. Thank you to Seoul for inviting us to be part of the Future Innovation Forum and the Seoul Innovation Week. It's always a pleasure to have this conversation with you. The book will be out in the next couple of months. Please sign up to SIX website, sign up to the newsletter so you get the subscription. And in the book, you will find all of your questions answered in much greater detail. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure. Have a wonderful evening, a wonderful afternoon, a wonderful day, wherever you are in the world. And we'll be in touch soon. Take care. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
네, 2020 서울 혁신 주간 특별 세션, 이 서울의 사회 혁신.
It was the special session at the 2020 Seoul Innovation Week. It was truly great to hear the presentations and discussions from 7 speakers of International Advisory Group 6 on Seoul's legacy of social innovation. Now, with this, we will end the special session here, and the 2020 Seoul Innovation Week will continue with the theme of ways of social innovation and transformation. Now, we are here gathered together to explore ways to make our city more sustainable in the future. Well, we are going to resume our event again at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we are going to have a number of sessions tomorrow and the day after, so please stay tuned for the upcoming sessions. Thank you very much again, everyone.